Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy Seeley, president of Seeley Test Pros and LEAP, helping students to succeed in all kinds of tests from 8th grade to grad school throughout Ohio.
And I'm Mike Bergen, president of Chariot Learning, helping students with test school and life based out of Rochester, New York.
Between the two of us today, we have over 60 years of experience at the highest levels of the test preparation and supplemental education industries.
We both love to talk and learn about the latest issues in education, testing, and admissions. So let's get down to tests and the rest. The fascinating topic we want to explore today is a test taker's perspective on the enhanced ACT. But first, let's meet our special guest, who we are not revealing, but is someone who took the April 2025 enhanced ACT.
So our guest today has her master's degree in higher education and has worked in multiple areas of college administration. She has been a professional SAT and ACT tutor for the last 10 years and works with students across the United States for several test prep companies. She understands the preparation necessary to do well in standardized tests, especially the ACT. She prides herself on the score she has earned on officially administered ACTs in recent years, earning consistent 36 composites. Most importantly, Mike, she took the recent digital enhanced ACT on April 5th, 2025. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be with both of you this morning.
We're excited to have you. This is kind of, Amy, like a secret shopper situation,
It is a secret shopper.
And the power of a secret shopper is that the shopper's secret. So a secret tester also can experience the test, explore it, completely abide by all of the legality around taking the test, but still reveal valuable information. We want to protect our secret shopper. That said, we would love to understand, before we dive into the topic of your perspective on the enhanced ACT, what your context is. What is the lens through which you can evaluate this exam? Have you taken the ACT before? Have you done well on it? Share with us what you can.
Absolutely. Becoming a tutor, I think I always wanted to have the experience level to say to my students, I'm never going to recommend something to you that I wouldn't do myself. So when I think became a tutor about 10 years ago and realized that technically anybody can log into an ACT account and sign up, I thought, well, let's do that. So about 5 months into becoming a tutor, I took the December ACT in 2015. And like most of us nerds in the industry, I loved it. Totally loved it. I would do it every weekend. So for the past 10 years, other than COVID, I would say I really try to go in once a year and sign up just like our students do, take the ACT. That way, for a lot of different reasons, I think I can hopefully bring that perspective to my tutoring appointments, but then also keep up with, how are these questions being asked? What do these strategies feel like when you're implementing them? So this new enhanced version of the ACT was something I was very intrigued by. I knew day zero, I had to be there.
That is exciting. Now, it would probably be dispiriting if you went in every year and took the ACT and scored poorly. Does that describe your experience of the ACT?
I would like to say that I go in and always try my best. I think I approach taking the test on test day with real test takers as a little bit of kind of an explorer, but also, Mike, I'm too competitive. I gotta go in there and I gotta prove that I'm worth the money these families pay me.
Listen, I'm trying to set you up here. What's your highest score on the ACT?
So my highest score on the ACT is a 36.
There you go.
And that to me, right, is always the goal. That's my favorite thing to mention to students and parents when they ask me, if you took the test, what do you think you would score?
And you have letters to prove that you got 36s, right?
I do.
You have the receipts. You have the receipts.
I do. My partner at home even framed one of them. So I have a little shrine to the ACT at my house to prove I'm legit.
Okay, you are legit. You've proved it. Let's talk about this test and whether the enhanced ACT is legit. What were your general impressions about the enhanced ACT? And just to clarify for listeners, we're talking about the digital format, the enhanced ACT, with all of the changes that we've discussed in previous episodes regarding the enhancements.
I mean, I liked it. In terms of it being digital, I'm a very classic pencil and paper lady. But I think probably adjusting to the SAT, after the past couple of years has helped. I think math struck me as being quite difficult, which I laugh about because that's always what our students want to tell us after every single
Right.
test administration. But I also found myself finishing the test thinking, oh my goodness, that math is the hardest that I've ever
You,
seen.
but as far as what you're saying is like your impression is it really landed hard for you when you took it.
Yes, I would say I pride myself on really feeling like I can predict at least 30 questions that they're going to see on every single math test. And I did not feel that way.
So let's stick with the general overview. We're going to
Yeah.
dive deep on the math part. The general overview, the platform,
Mhm.
the process. Did it feel less speeded? You know, that first impression.
Absolutely. Format was exactly what I expected. So if a student is logging on to the ACT's digital testing website and accessing those timed and untimed practice tests, they're going to see exactly what's on there on test day. So I loved
Right.
that. Having the extra time was nice. I will say in complete honesty that even when I take the official tests, I usually get a little tight on time towards the end of math and science historically. And on this test, I had extra time in every single section. And I would say it really felt like a lot of kids in the room also had extra time, which is great.
We've talked previously. Can you comment real quickly on testing in the room, the different groups that were testing, sort of finishing?
We assume that you took the science. Did anyone leave before they took the set for the science section?
Yes, I was in a room of over 70 students, so quite a large group. And I myself was registered to take the science, but not the writing, and didn't realize that test takers around me were there in multiple kind of iterations of testing. So
All
when
the
the
different permutations that we expect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
exactly. So after the reading section, the proctor kind of called out by name which students in the room were leaving, who were not taking science, were not taking writing, and then even kind of connected, I believe, with two students who were not taking science but were taking writing. So those students began the writing section as we began the science section. And then when my science was over, I and many other students left. The poor kiddos there who were also taking writing. So those test takers taking science and writing are having to watch a lot of people kind of shuffle out over that last hour of the test.
Did you find that distracting?
Yes, well, it also just felt like kind of a weird break in the momentum.
Yeah.
And I think for some of our students who are a little, prone to distractions or also just are getting burnt out by the end of the test, that's a little rough. Like that's mentally a little
I
bit
wonder
tough
if
to
there
watch all
should
these
have
people
been
leave.
some acknowledgement. Hey, guys, this is going to happen. Sometimes that, at least when there's an expectation, might have helped a little bit.
And I think what's going to happen is once this is the format everywhere, students will be broken out into much smaller rooms. Even finding a location that administers the enhanced ACT right now is challenging, right? You probably had to travel a certain distance. It wasn't like all the. So I wouldn't worry so much about that. I would worry about why ACT is even allowing students to skip the science and take the writing as if what school on this planet wants writing but not
I know.
science?
Those kids didn't get the memo,
What?
Mike.
Ugh.
Well, so let's then kind of dive into, in terms of similarities, then. What are some things that stood out to you as being like, this is very similar from every ACT I've taken in my career?
I will say, just starting off, it's still a long test. I
Mhm.
know that the ACT wants to become competitive with the SAT, but I arrived at 7:45 a.m. The test probably began around 8:15. I didn't get out of there until 11:30. So you're still
Mhm.
there over 3 hours.
The test without science is even shorter than the SAT, and the SAT sometimes takes up to an hour to launch. So, right, these tests are long.
Hmm.
And obviously you took the science. We know in the future there'll probably be a number of students who don't take science. But you're right. To your point, it's like it's still you're doing 4 sections over several hours, and you felt that as you were taking it.
So those lucky those lucky non-science test takers were out of there at about 10:50, so not bad. But I think if I had a student who is still taking the science, I still gotta prepare them for that long morning. My favorite test section, good old English. Geez, it felt 1-to-1 compared to what we've been prepping students for
Yeah.
years.
The change in like just adding the prompt didn't mean a thing, right? The reformatting
No.
of the items.
Because the new prompt for every question or the prompt that they give is very generic, much like the SAT. It's sort of, do you remember what that prompt actually kind of reads now? The generic sort of prompt?
Yeah, it's which choice is most grammatically
Right,
acceptable,
which is
I
like
believe.
an SAT, which follows standard English convention, right? It's kind of a generic prompt.
Right. Though the only thing we can talk about this in differences too is just how you're preparing students for when they get a question that is not that. But in terms of, good old commas and, subject verb agreement, places where you are moving a sentence somewhere new. Yeah, it's still business as usual, I would say, in the English.
So there was supposed to be, or there will be, an essay, which is basically
An
argumentative,
argumentative,
not the
right?
personal narrative that they often share, but another argumentative essay on the English. Did you encounter that?
If I did, I didn't even clock it. It
Okay,
felt
which means that there probably wasn't any different question stem associated with it.
That's what I was going to say. The stems to me were all to continue to kind of compare it to the release timed and untimed practice sections. The stems were exactly the same and still model, I would say, most of the stems that we see on a current version of the ACT.
We all know that any of these sections are going to have field test items that are experimental and don't count. Did you feel like in English there was anything that you thought could have been field test, or you just felt like no, this all felt like stuff I've seen before?
No, yeah,
Okay.
it felt so traditional. I will say there was an interesting subject verb agreement question, where it almost felt like a vocabulary question. There were 4 different verbs. 3 of them were singular, 1 was plural.
So
I found
that's
that
interesting
interesting.
because we know that the English section always includes vocabulary. It's
Mhm.
not uncommon to see vocabulary tested in exactly that format, but combining that with subject verb agreement is really crazy. Actually makes it a little easier for
Well,
students
the strategy,
without
right?
a
The
good
strategy of
vocabulary.
3 and 1, pick the different one,
That's right.
still applied. That's the beautiful part about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Moving on to math.
Wait, let's save math for the end because math is the most different,
Is that
right?
okay?
Math is the most different. How about
Yes.
reading?
So reading, I would say the types of questions you expect from a reading passage were still there. The typical first question is, about the main idea or author, how it was organized. Very, very traditional. So even though, things were looking a little bit shorter, we still
When you
had a
say
double
things were looking shorter, were
passage.
you saying the
Mhm.
passages were looking shorter or the questions were looking shorter?
Questions, just having that one fewer question per passage, it definitely stuck out to me. Like that to me felt like, ooh, cool, I get to zoom right into the next one. But, in terms of length of passage, it felt very comparable to what we see. I part of me wishes it was on paper so I could really do that comparison. I think having to scroll down to read the passage on the left side of the screen, I don't love as a reader
That was the
myself.
thing that
Right.
we were most interested in on
Yeah.
reading was the fact that it's obvious that the long passages on a digital platform are awkward. You're doing a lot of
Right. The
scrolling
scroll, a lot
back
of
and
scrolling.
forth. The reading skills that are required are still the same reading skills, going back, finding the information in the passage, a lot of navigating the text.
On the old test, we would often say, oh, I would say, like, if you just had 5 more minutes, reading might feel better. Time wise, how did you feel with the allotment of time for the reading section?
I had about 10 minutes left over after finishing all 4
But you
passages.
are
And
a very fast and very good reader.
I
Let's
will
just
say,
say.
I was gonna give the caveat of when I finished, I looked around
Mhm.
and was intrigued by how many other students were finishing within minutes of
That's
myself. But
terrific.
Yeah.
How were the annotation tools? Did you find them helpful or did you find them lacking?
I found them lacking. I did not use them. And I've tried them on the ACT's digital practice tests. I mean, the reality is I can highlight something while I'm reading the passage on one question, but as soon as I go to the next question, my highlights disappear.
Yeah, that's a big problem, isn't it?
Which is different
Hmm.
from the digital SAT. I think we probably would all agree the annotation tools for digital SAT and reading rating are probably better than ACT.
Right. But I guess it's that idea that this is a challenge that College Board didn't have to deal with is how do you handle multiple questions on the same passage and what do you preserve? Was there a way to take notes at all?
Not through the digital platform. We were allowed to use scrap paper on all four sections. So if I had wanted to, I easily could have written things down or sketched out things, which I know a lot of tutors do recommend on a digital test.
Right.
I didn't employ them. I'm just a classic answer eliminator gal. So that's my tool of choice.
Hmm.
But no, not really any highlighting.
Totally get it. Let's move on to the science. How did the science reconcile with your prior experience of the science section?
The digital version of the science, it's just a problem. I
Still a problem. It's still the same problem that it's always been.
I mean, we mentioned scrolling, right?
Right.
I just think for most humans, not just students, but I think people interpreting data, well, gosh, like you want to put your finger on it. You want to point things out. You want to circle things.
Right.
It's what I want my students to do when they're taking a science
And you're only
test.
getting a limited view of the passage where the scrolling, you're like, I see this, but I don't like it, right?
Right. And I will say, like, in terms of challenges, the way those visual aids are labeled is gonna be an issue because I myself got confused at several points of, am I looking at figure one or figure two?
Right.
Because
Which we
especially
do
for some
see
of
that
those,
in like the current test where sometimes you have to alert yourself, like they label that figure above versus below, but you're suggesting in a screen, it's even more complicates even further.
yeah, I mean, they're stacked on top of each other. So, this creeps into differences, but in science now we've got seven passages. And so that does mean that we've got three passages, at least from my enhanced version, that fall into that data representation category. So if you're talking about three very database passages with
Yeah.
two, sometimes three figures, and that's what I encountered, a passage where it was
So were the
literally
passages shorter or not? Or they just cut down the number of questions per passage,
cut down the number of questions.
but not the length of
Um,
the passages themselves?
they still had, I would say, like your research summaries still had paragraphs about how the study was conducted, how
Mhm.
experiment two is different than experiment one. I felt like I could breeze over a lot of it. Like I will say the shorter like one fewer question per passage, that did work with me. I liked that.
Okay, great.
Um, so I did feel like I wasn't necessarily always needing to return to read the description of the study, but having multiple figures or tables, boom, 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 when you're scrolling up and down, and you're technically seeing that the previous figure is labeled as figure one, but it's above the label is above figure two. Ugh, don't love it.
Did you encounter an engineering design passage?
Well, geez, Mike, I need to go back to my definition of engineering
Right. I
because
think that's the
Well, right. So something
right?
that seemed qualitatively different from a regular physics passage, right? There's supposed to be the introduction of this new topic in addition to biochemistry, physics, and earth space science. It didn't really pop out to you?
No,
Okay.
not at all. No, it felt like I will say in terms of the questions being asked in science, it did feel very typical. Very straightforward questions about tables and figures, questions where we were making a prediction based on the existing data that started with your classic suppose.
What about an increase in background knowledge questions?
Same. It really,
Same
I,
number.
yeah.
So, okay, so
2 to 3.
It sounds like the projected changes to the enhanced science section may not be fully manifesting.
Yeah.
And at least not in a way that sticks out to a test taker.
That's fair.
Well, the other comment, though, we obviously have communicated. There's some others who took the test the same day you did, that we are aware there were clearly different versions. So that it's that particular version that you might be describing. We definitely know there were other forms of the test, in which case maybe, Mike, there could be an engineering one, but at least what she's describing is that there was not something obvious.
Let's move to math, and I want to frame our conversation by pointing out that ACT projected a number of changes, including eliminating a number of the integrating essential skills questions, meaning the questions that require math that is taught before students get to high school, but often at a higher level of complexity. ACT also projected that they would be getting rid of certain harder topics. And finally, ACT eliminated one of the 5 answer choices. So now there's the consistent 4 choices instead of 5 choices, which automatically makes the test easier. And they eliminated items. So one would imagine that not all of those things could be true at the same time. And if you are making the test easier by design, you're going to have to jack up the difficulty somewhere.
Compensate somewhere, right?
Yeah. Did that happen?
She's like, oh, buckle up.
Yes. Goodness gracious. For years and years, I've told I think part of my little spiel, as I'm sure we all have one, when you're describing the ACT math section to a new test taker, I usually say you're going to feel that difficulty kick in the 30s. I've even sometimes told students like, oh, you might see a series of questions about 3 or 4 questions in the 30s, and that's where you're going to feel the test get harder. By the teens, by about question 13, 14, I already felt like these are questions that to me would be standard in the late 30s, if not the 40s of a standard test.
That is major.
Now, do I know if those are field test questions in some cases? I don't know, but there's only supposed to be 4 field test questions.
Right.
Well, the one thing I do want to mention that there's been a little bit spiraling on is in English, reading, and science, which are divided into passages, there is a reasonable chance that the field test items could all be contained within one singular passage, which will make it easier down the road to put out the my answer key with your test and answers. But in math, there are no series questions, right? There are no that are dependent upon, like in the past, I think they're eliminating those questions that were interrelated, like 3 in a row that go together. So in this particular case, it's like each question's like every man for himself. And it sounds like they're like, we can put whatever we want anywhere, but we just don't know which ones counted, which ones didn't.
And I've always felt like a geometry girl on this test. I love how much geometry is on the ACT math. I wouldn't say I'm a statistics girl. And the statistics really threw me off here.
Were there any statistics questions that deviated from the standard? Like, were there more sampling questions? Did they introduce something like standard deviation, which they haven't really tested?
Or they've done some weird stuff with terminology, right? Different kinds of like surveying techniques.
But what stood out?
Friends, I don't really know what a linear correlation coefficient is. It's just not in my universe. So I saw about 1 traditional mean question. It wasn't an easy mean question, but I saw one that it could have appeared on previous iterations of the test. No standard deviation, but definitely some interesting scatter plots and linear model questions that I was surprised by.
Which remind me, wouldn't you agree, Mike? That sounds a little bit like leaning towards an SAT math. Like they're leaning in a little bit more to that.
Well, my prediction was that they would have to do that. They would have to create tougher questions. They couldn't get rid of the hardest topics. Mm-hmm. In fact, I felt like they might double down. Some of the topics that were unique to the ACT, like matrices, vectors, or things like that. Did you see them on the test?
No, I was sad. I love a good
No,
matrix
no, no, but that's
question and
good. So
none at
maybe they
all.
are moving
Hmm.
matrices out because matrices, they're not even consistently taught in all 50 states
Truth.
as part of
Right.
Algebra 2. So I can understand getting rid of that, but were there topics that were tested that you haven't seen on prior exams?
At least from my perspective, and maybe I've missed something here and there, regression models did come up
Regression
towards the
models.
end. Yes, there was a linear regression model question towards the end.
Well, that's an SAT topic now.
That's what
They
I'm
don't
saying.
use
I
the
think
term regression, but they do give the tables, the regression tables.
what's tricky about that is that I remember this when I first started tutoring ACT after having tutored SAT again many years ago. But I remember that my first time tutoring for the ACT, I was learning terminology. Like there was some terminology that was like, oh, you're going to, like, I called it simultaneous equations and they
Yeah.
refer to it as systems of equations. So I'm
Yes.
wondering in this, some of this
The
language
terminology
will
is,
have
yeah.
to be so that because obviously when you see the terminology, that's off-putting. That's scary. I think some of this is learning, oh, what is some of the terminology that we now have to make more accessible or user-friendly to students? That's where I'm coming from, I think, with this. Would you think that that might be how tutors would view this in the future?
Yes, yes. I think thinking about how the questions are asked to me is I do a lot of math classes and one-on-one math tutoring, and it felt like for a while, like I can really coach a student through the language of the test. And this was something I felt like, ooh, I don't know if my students would read some of these questions and understand exactly what they're being asked to solve.
So let's pivot away from talking about the test itself to how we should be moving forward. When you're thinking of what you would recommend to your students, you started to formulate those like this is what I might recommend. We'd love to hear some of those recommendations.
So I know for a fact I want to get them onto, well, at least right now between we're in a little bit of a weird spot right now because we don't quite have a new book yet to see a paper version of this enhanced test.
But the official ACT prep guide should be available at Amazon, I think starting like May 6th. So for what it's worth, it's coming, but you're right. At least as we speak now today, it is not available.
And for my digital test takers, I would definitely be getting them onto the ACT's website and starting to expose them to the way that the time limits work, the way that the English STEM questions are going to be posed. I mean, this is something, I'm sure every digital tutor is already talking about, but making sure they're aware of the pop-up that informs them there's 5 minutes left, being
Talk
careful
about
on,
that. Talk about what your experience was with that.
yeah, so maybe I've just gotten lazy and accustomed to the pop-up that the SAT provides on Blue Book when there are 5 minutes remaining. But there were several sections of the digital ACT I did not even notice the pop-up that there were 5 minutes left because it was so small. It only occurs next to the countdown timer, which on the ACT's platform is in the far right corner. And geez, on my little Chromebook, that pop-up had to be about a centimeter big.
Okay,
So
that's
especially,
disconcerting, right? For
That is,
students
yeah.
that don't do a good job with timing. So excellent recommendation. Did you wear a watch?
I did not because I
Okay.
was really like, I have that countdown
Would
timer
you
right in front
recommend
of
that
me.
students wear a watch and put it on their table?
If they're using it during tutoring and getting used to checking in with it, definitely. Hopefully, if students are doing what we want them to do on a digital test and they're using that scrap paper, their eyes are just moving off of the screen far too often, which isn't a bad thing necessarily. But for a student that has trouble with time, that is something they're going to have to think
Well, I
about.
think what you're suggesting, it sounds like it's like a notification on your phone. If there's a blip and you miss it, you don't see the warning. And so
Right.
you actually don't, it's not like a proctor speaking up and saying loudly, you have 5 minutes remaining. That's a different experience, which is important to understand.
I also didn't I think there were two questions where I thought I clicked the answer choice, and I realized a couple questions in, you really have to click that circle in exactly. And so I was kind of clicking on the answer, and that was not registering my answer choice. I had to click on the bubble in front of the answer.
That's very interesting.
Little growing pains.
But these are so, think about it, these are little things that can be such a big difference if we know that like one more question right could be another point or two. Who
Sure,
knows,
but I
right?
think that the platform itself may undergo some transformations before September or even after September.
Well, we do know they're currently using two different platforms, one for Saturday testing, one for school day. So they're eventually, right, some uniformity and some better user interface, let's just say, right?
Let's hear one more recommendation for either students or tutors, please.
Honestly, get those students ready for the different English questions so that they are prepared to know when they're going to see a question that is just about a grammatical choice versus redundancy versus tone.
But how is that different from previous? Like,
Mhm.
is there a distinction between how you would have prepared a student?
Well,
and asked
tone
for
is
the
not a
English?
question that's been really asked in English before, correct? Reading, yes, but not generally
Even just
English.
seeing like, oh, this question is clearly asking me which choice is least redundant. So for anybody that's ever hesitated with should I pick the shortest answer? I mean, especially for my kiddos to second guess
I feel
themselves.
like that's a staple on the
Oh,
It is.
ACT.
It
it
has
is,
been.
but I think
And the old delete the underlined portion entirely is a
totally.
classic choice.
I don't know about you guys. I have so many students that will still miss some of those shorter questions in practice and go, "Well,
No, it's true. It's
I
totally
wasn't
true.
sure if that's one I was supposed to."
Absolutely. But once they
Right.
learn, so you're just saying like double down on the classics of grammar and also the rhetorical skills.
Yeah, because I think especially when we're in this digital period of time right now, I think on a computer test, those kids are not paying attention to the question being asked of them. I see it on the SAT all the
Mhm.
time.
Sure.
And so really letting them understand, no, that question is actually in some cases prompting you as to what answer you're supposed to choose, if it's redundancy or tone. I can see that mattering. So it's a little thing, but I do really think it matters. I'm gonna bring it up with a lot of my kiddos.
So I think we could pepper you with questions for hours more. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having me, letting me remain my secret shopper status. Appreciate you guys. I'm trying to get back in there in September if I can.
We appreciate our secret shopper.
Awesome. We hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as we did. Be sure to join us for another fascinating topic and guest on the next Tests and the Rest.
Did you enjoy this episode as much as we did? Find expanded links and more for this and all of our episodes at our show page at testsandtherest.com. While you're there, be sure to explore everything the larger TestBright site has to offer, including real, expert, unbiased answers to the toughest admissions testing questions. Of course, we'd love for you to rate, review, and subscribe to Tests and the Rest on your favorite podcast platform. If there's a topic or guest you'd like us to feature, just let us know and spread the word.